the world does not need another rendition of some piano classic. Like, there's no shortage of recordings anywhere in the world of great performances of piano standards. So what we need are people who can create. So how can we encourage them to create at the keyboard and away from the keyboard?
Welcome to the Creative Piano Teaching Podcast, the place where teachers from around the world meet to share innovative ideas about music education. Listen and learn as we help you motivate your students, grow your income, expand your studio, and become a more creative piano teacher.
Welcome back to another edition of the Creative Piano Teaching Podcast, and thanks so much again for listening wherever you are in the world and whatever you're doing at the moment, walking the dog, washing up, cleaning up after the kids. It's great that you've taken this time to listen, and I do hope you get a lot out of today's episode. My name is Tim Topham, and I'm the teacher behind the Creative Piano Teaching Podcast, the blog at timtopham.com, and the Inner Circle Piano Teaching Community. This is the podcast to listen to if you're interested in teaching in a more contemporary and creative way. Each week, we explore fresh ideas for your teaching or business, interview the most interesting and innovative music educators from around the world, and give you a regular dose of creative inspiration for your studio. Today's show notes and full transcript are available at timtopham.com/episode 76. Now, in today's session, we're going to be talking about why music education needs a reframing for the 21st century. We're going to talk about some of the links between creativity and entrepreneurship and how we can give our students today, whatever age they are and wherever they're at in their learning, the best chance of succeeding in what is a very changing world. My guest today is an internationally renowned change agent in music education. A vocal and passionate advocate for entrepreneurship and innovation. She's a conservatory-trained horn player, let's not hold that against her, and like me, had a big break away from music and into business and overseas travel and all sorts of other ventures before returning more recently to music education. Her passion is in reframing music education for the 21st century, and this year, I'm very excited that she'll be taking up the newly created role of Associate Lecturer in Music Entrepreneurship for the Melbourne Conservatorium of Music. It couldn't have come at a better time, and I know the students there are going to be very lucky. She lives in Melbourne with her husband and two sons and dabbles in a bit of beef cattle raising when she's not tooting her own horn, pardon the pun. Susan de Weger, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Tim. That's a really fantastic introduction. Thank you so much.
Oh, look, I do try.
Can I just add too? I am a really atrocious pianist, so I'm just going to put it out there. I'm very enthusiastic, but I'm quite a hack on the piano.
Oh, that's all right. I like piano hacks. They're some of the most fun people to play around with on the piano. It's great.
That's me. Greatest hits of Andrew Lloyd Webber. I'm there.
All right, so let's talk about this concept of reframing music education for the 21st century. I actually got that quote from your website. It's something that is obviously the basis of a lot of what you do. What do you actually mean by this, and why do we need to do it?
Yeah, I think, look, we don't, as a parent and as an educator, I'm really concerned about the future of my children to be work ready. And we don't know what the jobs of the future are going to be because they haven't been created yet. But we do know the skills that are going to be needed to flourish in the workplace in 5 or 10 years' time. And I think that music education actually provides many of the key skills needed for future competency and future success. But we're really just looking at music education for what it does for us on the stage. We're not looking at it as a set of skills that can take us beyond the stage to success in many other places in life. So that's what I'm talking about, reframing the value purpose of what music education can do for you.
Yeah, so it's not so much about changing how we're doing everything, because a lot of what we do is good and we know from research that it has positive benefit. It's more about the why we're doing it. Is that right?
Exactly. Oh, it's both. I think in terms of the sort of classroom delivery and delivery at children and preteen, I think that's really fantastic. I think there's a lot of reform that needs to happen in the conservatory models and at higher education. So the reframing at that end it really needs to be around curriculum reform. But for all of us, the conversation could be much wider about what music education is valuable for and who it can make us.
Interestingly, I've just spent this morning writing my blog post for this week, which without giving too much away, does cover some topics about knowing your goals for teaching and what you actually want your students to be able to do later on. Because I think oftentimes we teach and often quite effectively, but we don't really think so much about what we're trying to achieve for our students.
And also, why am I doing this as an educator? Why am I doing this? Why have I chosen to be an educator? What is it that's driving me to, it can be a pretty tricky career with, high rates of self-employment. Why am I doing this? And really working out the value that you're giving and the impact you're having, because that feeds really intimately into the work that you do in the teaching studio. And if you're clear about, well, I'm doing this because I'm helping prepare my students for future success, then you can add on all the, the technical bits and pieces on top of that. But that can help. It can help influence the decisions you make about the way your business is going to go and about the teaching practices that you have as well.
Absolutely. And let's sort of follow up that concept of future success. I think sometimes we perhaps look at our students through the lens of we're teaching performance. Do you reckon we're on track with that, or is that actually not that realistic now?
I don't think it's very realistic, and I also don't think it's actually in the best interest of the students, which is what should be our prime motivator.
And why is that?
There's many, many ways you can be a musician. Many, many ways. And if we think that being paid to perform on a stage for people is the most important thing that comes out of our training, then we're really misguided. Because even for the small percentage who do want to build a life in music, getting paid to play is probably the least amount of thing they'll do and the least amount of money they're going to earn. It'll be the most rewarding, but it's really not how our day plays out. I'm a professional horn player. Some days I don't get on the horn at all. It doesn't mean that playing the horn is any less important in my life, but it's just not where most of my energy is focused. So I think just holding up this one model of what we celebrate as a great outcome out of our teaching is pretty damaging, because it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on most of our students who love music. They love playing the piano or the horn. They love making music with their friends, but they really don't love being locked in a practice room for hours and hours and hours, building their technical competency. So what are we saying to those, to the majority of our students about the role that music can play in their life if we say they're not going to progress or enjoy it unless they're shackled to this instrument, unhappy, disconnected from the real world and the things that make them joyful and give them satisfaction, if the only way they can progress forward with this thing they're doing is to do something that makes them deeply unhappy, which is hours and hours and hours locked in a practice room. So I think that's really damaging to the self-belief that the music that they make is worthwhile.
And all of that with the potential of earning a living from it is almost zero too. I mean, that's I can give you the statistic on that. So there was some research undertaken in 2009, which is the most recent research we have here in Australia, and it showed that out of the approximately 160,000 musicians in our country, 0.4% had a full-time performance job. Wow. It brings it really home, doesn't it?
So what are we saying to the 99.6% who can and want to live a creative and musical life if we just say that being paid to play your instrument is success?
And I think for those listening, and most of my listeners, as you know, are piano teachers, mostly working with younger students and often beginners,
yep.
Where I guess what we're talking about is that the things that we do in our lessons, while we might not be thinking, oh, okay, little Alice who's coming for her lessons at age 8, I know that she's unlikely to be a concert level performer. We know the statistics now are very small, but I'm still perhaps teaching her in a way that is still focused on that, even if I don't really realize it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the big push that I'm making in all the resources I'm giving teachers, is that if we really do focus on performance and teaching students how to read written music and interpret it in the way that it was done back in the olden days, then even if we know for a fact that the performance career is not going to happen and they're not likely to do that, then are we giving them enough skills to do the other things?
Absolutely.
And so that's where I think this kind of a conversation is really important about what should we be teaching our youngest beginners if it's not solely focused on performance. Have you got some ideas around that?
I have, and I think also, just how do we go about fostering their love of music for them to be creative? So what the world does not need another rendition of some piano classic. Like, there's no shortage of recordings anywhere in the world of great performances of piano standards. So what we need are people who can create. So how can we encourage them to create at the keyboard and away from the keyboard? How can we encourage them to find where their passion is for music? And for some of them, that'll just, it'll be a couple of years of lessons, and then it will be fostering a love of enjoying music just for recreation and pleasure. And that's a really valuable outcome, giving them the love of music, So I think there's many, many ways we can support all the students to that's really what I think we should be doing, is fostering a love of it for life. And how can we, within that student's circumstances and their particular worldview, find the place where that's going to fit for them.
And that aligns really well with my own approach to teaching, and the one that I espouse in my work, in that if students, my opinion is, and I'm interested in yours on this, my opinion is that if students are given the skills to create music, do things at their instrument that doesn't require notation. So playing by ear, picking out tunes, creating simple little chord progressions or melodic ideas or little compositions. If they are given those skills, then I think they're far more likely to keep playing for the rest of their life.
Yep. And also, Tim, that's really important because that plays further down the line. So I'm sort of, a couple of years ahead in higher education. So I see them, 5 or 10 years later, is what I see with the students who want to live a life in music is they're incredibly fearful of failure. And that means they're afraid to try. And that comes from not being encouraged to improvise and create when they're younger. Yeah. So actually what you're doing is you're teaching them to try and fail and to error correct and to go again. And that's a skill wherever they go in life that's going to lead to success, is that cognitive flexibility and the strength in their decision making, that they know that they can give something a go, and whatever the outcome is, it will be worthy, and it's not the end, because that's a real issue with classical music, is we're a bit of it's win or fail in notated music, and that is, I think that's a really big issue for a lot of the mental health challenges that our industry faces. So I think this, like you're talking about, this improvisation and teaching them to create, that's training for life. That's absolutely gold for them.
I also think it's so sad that we often forget that concerts in Beethoven's day, Chopin's day, those composers played their own music, and often it was improvised, wasn't it? It was it was them creating stuff on the spot, and the best pianists were the ones that were able to improvise the best. Not that they were trying to play, the older music from the medieval times or anything like that. They were creating stuff on the spot, and yet we still have this conservatory model in particular that just ruthlessly dictates that there's only one form of output at a piano.
Yep. And also that if you are not compliantly copying what went before you, that you are wrong. And that absolutely kills me. I see it every day. And like, I know from my experience as a horn player, if somebody said to me, "Can you play something?" boom, my heart rate's gone up to 180, right? Because I'm like, but I don't have any music in front of me. And I mean, I have a master's degree in performance. Surely I should be able to just do something for them. But for our students who we're looking to foster a love of just making music, this ability for them to turn up at a party when they're in their 30s and someone say, "Oh, can you play something for us?" And for them to have the self-belief to go, "Sure," and just get out and bust out something without this really terrible negative self-judgment that goes on from our training about that it's this way or it's wrong. So I think the way that you teach is actually going to really substantially, and the way that you're helping other teachers learn how to teach is going to substantially change our next generation of young people who are creative in lots of endeavours in their life, stemming from the training they've had in the piano practice room.
Well, I hope so. Absolutely.
I hope so too.
We've talked about improvising and helping students get creative, but have you got any examples of what this actually might look like in a music lesson? It doesn't have to be piano either. I know from my experience, I've got 2 young children, and they're not learning piano, they're learning other instruments. But the thing that they love doing most, that gets them most excited, is playing with others. So how can we foster opportunities for them just to get together? And that's also what we know from the teaching of creativity, from what we know from psych and neuroscience. It tells us that this working together in positive environments is a really key way that people can start to develop this mental flexibility to be able to create original ideas. So, perhaps you could try and put some students together and get them playing 4-handed pieces and improvising together, because they'll be laughing. I can only imagine you get even three little tiny children on a chair together and say, okay, we're going to improvise on a B flat major arpeggio, everybody go, they're going to fall off the piano, still laughing at themselves. So I think this collaborative music making, or maybe if they've got a sibling and the sibling plays, I don't know, marimba or tuba or whatever it is, can the sibling come along to a lesson and they're doing something together? So I think this collaborative, it takes the pressure off and makes it a bit more fun, and that's where a lot of key learning is going to happen. Could you pick 2 more weird instruments to add to that? Marimba and tuba emphasise.
In my house, my 2 children play 2 of those instruments.
Hang on, what is bassoon?
Yes.
And tuba?
Yes.
No way.
Yeah, they do.
That is hysterical.
We're doing a bit for the endangered species of the orchestra.
Of the low end of the orchestra, that's right.
Yeah, we only do bass clef only in my house.
Yeah, right. I really love that idea of getting students together, and all teachers, even if they don't do this very often, know the effect, because they might have seen it at a concert or seen a YouTube video of kids playing together and having a great time on one instrument. I think the challenge for us as piano teachers is our instrument is a solitary instrument, or can often be. And unless the child, as you say, is encouraged to seek out someone to play with or for or something, it can be quite challenging.
So what about creating some MIDI tracks that they can play along and improvise to? So there's ways that we can use technology to solve that problem. So maybe creating a teaching resource twice a year that are MIDI tracks of songs that the students would have been listening to on popular radio, and encouraging them to listen and play along by ear, and then maybe improvise during the chorus or the final 12. So I think there's ways that technology can get around that, and that also fixes the scheduling issue, because that's another. I'm a working parent with 2 children, and if my instrumental teacher said, hey, can you come at a different time next week? Well, I just can't. Yeah. But there's ways that we can use the tech as part of the solution.
Yeah, and it's not quite the same, I guess, because you haven't got that in-person-to-person contact, but it's a good second option, and it's one that I definitely promote a lot to my teachers, and there's some great apps that I've shared before that I use all the time for that kind of purpose. One other thing that I've heard teachers doing more and more, although it's not for playing together so much, is to do crossover lessons. So moving to a situation where every student has a 45-minute lesson, and for 15 minutes of time, they cross over in the middle, and they do most often it's to do some kind of lab work. So some iPad work or games or something off the bench. But I could see that same kind of concept working potentially for a duet thing. So potentially if teachers have a recital coming up and they'd like to get students together, maybe you could organise a crossover period where students come and they share 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour of a lesson, where you can do that work together. Just another
Absolutely.
idea.
And also finding an opportunity for them to practice that in front of people. So at the end of season studio recitals, including that. So it's not just all the prepared pieces, but there's space and advertisement around the fact that the students are going to be improvising during the concert.
Mm. And it's another way to differentiate your studio too. If this becomes something that you do more and more and put more videos up on YouTube, then you can get a reputation that actually yours is a very creative,
progressive school
that encourages pianists to play together. Yeah.
Imagine even if you had a fellow musician who's, say, an electric guitar teacher, like, could you do a swapsies where that electric guitar teacher came in for a couple of hours to your studio and allowed your students to improv with the electric guitar, and then you went into his studio or their studio on keyboard and did some improvisation with their guitar students? So, there's ways we can also use our networks to be opening up other opportunities and being creative in our teaching practices as well.
And that reminds me too of the concept of the pop piano recital, which I did an interview in maybe in 2015 now with testing my memory, but I'll find a link and I'll put it in the show notes. And that was the idea of getting together for the end of the end of year recital, or whenever you're doing your recitals, and having all students perform a pop piece with a small band, bass, drums, guitar. And I did this at the end of last year at my school, and it was phenomenal. It was so much fun.
Awesome.
The kids loved it. And I was very lucky, of course, being in a school environment. The 3 band members were all the 3 teachers. So we had the best drummer, the best bass player, and they just grooved along. It was brilliant.
That's
really
awesome.
Good.
So what about for your younger students, like the primary school age kids, if you did an all Disney end of season recital and you did The Little Mermaid and you had a vocalist and a string quartet,
be cool.
And so the students pay a small levy that goes, collectively then is the payment for the musicians, but they each got to do a Disney classic, and it was an all Disney concert. So and that's all of a sudden the students are having to play with and they're having to work collaboratively, which as an early keyboard student is that it's not like you have the opportunity to play in orchestras like we do. So you're learning those chamber music skills of non-verbal communication and listening, because you're having to work within a structured group, and I think parents would flock to that.
Yep, absolutely. And it builds that community too, because if you're getting kids together in groups, parents are hanging out while their kids are playing, and
and the kids are excited about what's going on too. So they're selling your studio for you by the fact that they're talking to everybody they meet about the fact that they're playing Under the Sea with a string quartet, and they're like, whose piano studio is this that you're learning for? How do I get in there?
Yep. That's all good. And it's good to think about these business aspects that we often we don't realise can be used as marketing too. These are all great tactics for building your studio via marketing too.
And I think also, we were talking a little bit about, how do we teach creativity? Well, I think we need to also teach creatively, and this is a way that we're teaching creatively in thinking about not only putting the student first in terms of their development, but also our business. How can we think creatively and model that kind of creative behaviour to inspire that in our students?
So I think this leads pretty well on to motivation, which is a huge area and something that I get asked and emailed about. In fact, when teachers sign up to my email list, one of the first questions I send them is, what are you struggling with at the moment? Shoot me back a reply. And I love reading these. But interestingly enough, I'd say 6 or 7 out of 10 replies are, how do I keep my students practicing? They're so overscheduled. They are so busy.
Yeah.
What can we do to try and help keep our students playing and practicing?
It's really hard because we're one of very many things that fit in the jigsaw of their life. So I think firstly, understanding that as important music is to us because we've chosen to make it our life, it isn't always to them. So not giving them a hard time. And and again, putting the student in the center of the experience. So maybe at the beginning of the teaching year, at the beginning of the semester, asking them what they want to do. So maybe right now for the next 6 months or the next 12 months, it's not the time to be focused on really pushing technical components of their skill forward, because they're not going to have the day in or 4 or 5 practice sessions a week. So maybe this year for them is about just working on their artistry. So maybe they just want to learn some of their favorite songs. Yeah, but so how do we? So it's about.
But Susan, we're not allowed to do that. We've got to cover everything in our lessons.
Oh man, I know.
They've got to learn to read. They've got to do everything. What? You can't say that, can you?
I'm just going to say it, Tim. Teach them, let them play pop songs. If that's what's going to get them turning up week after week and being happy to come to their lesson. So what's the priority for each of those individual students? There'll be some who are very motivated and will continue to work, and some for whom it just needs to be we're talking about creativity. For some, it just needs to be a joyous and creative output for them. So really what for each individual student's the best goal to be working on for them rather than a one-size-fits-all might help. With my oldest son is 13 and he's in his second year of high school. So for him, we've shifted from instead of kind of a daily practice calendar, I have a week-long practice calendar. So we sort of say, okay, as long as we get 3.5 sessions done a week, plus he has band as well, then that's better than the pressure of thinking, well, the day-to-day.
Yep.
Because that's pretty hard to manage because, they've got long days and they've got a lot on. So, breaking their practice calendar over 7 days or 14 days to make it a bit easier for them to fit it in. And I think, like we were talking about before, helping them to make music with others. Because that's what they want to do. What are their priorities in life?
Peers often at that age, isn't it?
Exactly. So do you have other peers in your studio where, maybe you've got a pair of them for whom working jointly on 4-handed keyboard stuff of contemporary music, that might be more appropriate for them than continuing on with sort of standard Western repertoire that's very technique driven that they're not going to have the time to commit to develop it. I think they're my kind of 3 suggestions.
Right, brilliant. I was actually speaking to a piano teacher's mine. I'm not sure you've heard of Forrest Kinney.
Yes.
You have? Yeah.
Yes.
So Forrest is a brilliant teacher of creativity and writer of books and things. And I was talking to him yesterday, and he was telling me a story about one of his students who just wanted to play the Beatles. I think he was maybe just after university kind of age, or that kind of late teens, early 20s. Just wanted to play the Beatles, and for some teachers, myself included, if I go back a few years, I wouldn't really have accepted that. I'd really feel like I had to include other genres and really push the reading and all that kind of stuff. But he said, look, I did this and I just supported him and I helped him learn as much Beatles as he wanted to. And he absolutely loved it. And then he said this guy went to a wedding and he heard a piece of music there. And so the next lesson he came rushing in to Forrest and said, oh, I heard this amazing piece of piano music. It was called Patch a Bell or something whatever it was. And Forrest said, oh, Pack a Bell can it? And so he started learning that. And then he had an into a whole nother genre. And so I think this is what we can learn about motivation, particularly in teenage years and particularly for adults, is that we really, as you say, have to meet them where they're at and help them do what they want to do. And knowing that as we get to know them better, we build rapport, we help them out, we can throw the odd bit of music in, or, hey, how about you have a listen to this YouTube when you go home this week? And you can start introducing them to new ideas and new genres, but you've got them hooked anyway.
Yeah, because you've kept the flame going. Yeah, and that's what we don't want to do, is extinguish that flame because we're being too descriptive about what must be done rather than it being a relationship between, well, what are you trying to get out of this and where are you at and how can I meet you there? Yeah. And
I think having you on the call, I want to throw in another question because you're a music parent. Now, I know sometimes parents, it can be hard to know how much we should be helping parents help their children or helping guide parents in setting up practice routines. I know you said, you've as a musician and as a parent, you've helped your son develop his practice routine and you've even changed it as it needed. What can we do to help our parents help our children?
That's a really great question. I think for your very young students, some print content, some print resources around what is what's expected from practice, and actually giving them some very clear guidelines. If the child is 6, 3 sessions of 10 or 15 minutes a week. I'm not a keyboard teacher, so I don't know if that's an appropriate amount. But yeah, it's giving them a little printed list of this is what we hope you would be aiming to do, and maybe even a sheet of gold stars that the student gets the gold stars and the parent gets the month calendar, and then the student has to put the gold star on for each of the little practice sessions they've done. And when they bring that to you at the end of the month, they get a chocolate frog if they've met 95 or 90% of the practice things. So very, very clear resourcing around at-home expectations.
Yeah.
Yep. And also making, I think as trained musicians, we often use language and jargon that other people don't understand. So pretend that in every piece of communication we do, obviously the parents they're smart people and they love their children very much and they're committed to supporting their children, but they may not be musicians themselves. So being very careful that anything that we give to the parents is written in a language that sort of a 15-year-old would understand, with no technical terms or very clear explanations of what those technical terms mean. If you're a non-music parent and I meet you at the door of my lesson and you say to me, Jimmy's doing really well, but look, his staccato wasn't great today. I've got no idea what that means. How am I going to help? Very clear and layman's terms explanations of what we're working on and what we're working towards.
And as I've progressed, I've found it is totally cool to guide your parents, your students' parents, in how to form a practice routine as well.
Yep, absolutely.
That's totally cool. Often parents don't think about it and they need help with it, so I think that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And parents are busy too, you know. So anything that we can give them that will help put some of the responsibility and on the child, even from a very early age, that's really great, because that's what. I'm lucky I've got one child out of my 2 children, one who's very self-motivated with his practice and one who's not. Yeah. So, the chocolate frogs works for one. It doesn't need to for the other. But giving parents ideas also for how to not be the fun police about practice, because that's often a mood killer for our young musicians too, is if the parents are too prescriptive or like punishing the student if the students aren't doing what's expected. That's not a great place for anyone to be. So just giving them some tips about also how they can help manage it and just keep it fun at home.
Yep. Now let's move forward to a little bit more about the work that you're doing at the moment. So let's say our piano student has gone through and they're actually about to start at Melbourne Conservatorium and you have some lessons with you on the realities of the careers in music. How are you kind of coaching students these days about how to build a career for themselves in the future?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I think that's one of the key problems with undertaking further music education is if you're a parent of a child in grade 9 or grade 10 getting onto the last couple of years of high school, and you go to the careers counsellor and say, look, my child or the student says, I really love music and I want to study music. Almost always they're told, don't do that, there's no jobs.
Yeah, it's so sad, isn't it? It's so sad.
And that is the reality. There are very few jobs, but that doesn't mean that there's not a really great career where you can generate a sustainable and a livable wage. Yep. So the first thing that I do when I work with them is actually look at some statistics around graduate outcomes, just to show them that overall, we have pretty good employability for music graduates, but the way that our working world is structured is quite different to, say, lawyers or architects. So we have very high rates of part-time employment. So around 50% of grads juggle
multiple jobs,
multiple part-time roles, and we have staggeringly high rates of self-employment. We're 3 times the self-employment rate of any other discipline.
Wow.
So that's what I'd say to them is your talent, like your artistic development and your musicianship, it must come first, because you're unemployable if you can't play with a great sound and in time and in tune. Yeah. So we've really got to focus your energy on ensuring that your artistry develops to the highest level it can. And then we also need to understand that that in itself is not a career and it's not a job. So we need to look at small business skills so that you can be self-employed and create opportunity for yourself and create opportunity for others. So just then we go talking about, okay, well, where are your passions? And if that's in performance and teaching, well, then a portfolio career that incorporates those two things is a way to go. A lot of our music students are really skilled in other areas that are can create and generate income for them. So that might be photography or web design or lots of other areas. So we actually look at individual
para-musical areas.
Yeah, exactly. So what else can you do that can probably pay better than working in music, that we can scaffold some part-time employment in that area where it's well paid and uses your training and your skills and you're valued, and that the income that you earn there will support your ability to make music on your own terms. Because there's no jobs to go to, and I'm a freelance professional and that doesn't keep me very busy. But most of the playing I do is self-created. And and I'm not making money off it, but it's paying for itself. So that's the model that I use for them, is that you need to be generating enough income outside of performance to live off. Mm-hmm. And whether that's teaching or whether that's in a part-time research position in a music school, in tertiary or however that is, but your performance can't be connected to your living wage because there's just not enough money in it.
Are you mainly working with performance students or any student?
No, any student. So I work with, in my role at the Conservatorium, I work with undergrad students and graduate students across our performance, our teaching and our research cohort. Mm-hmm. And then in my private work, I work a lot with professional musicians either wanting to get more involved with creating stuff for themselves. Mm-hmm. And I also work with music professionals who are looking to transition out of music into another career and don't know how to talk about the skills that they've got and navigate that transition.
Right.
So that's an area where I'm pretty busy at the moment, actually, because I did a music degree and then for 16 years I was not a musician. And I've come back to music and I see how my skills mapped really well, and I see how valuable our training is to really anywhere you want to go in life if you understand how to connect the two things together. Mm. And that's something that we're also not taught, not only at a conservatory level, but even in secondary school and primary school, we talk about the skills that we develop through our music training beyond just the performance part. So, yeah, I'm pretty busy doing a lot of that stuff at the moment too.
Yeah, and we can all, as music educators of any type or instrument, rest assured that even if our students don't continue with us for very long, there is an impact somewhere. We know
Absolutely.
That brains change, motivation grows, self-discipline changes, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing is that music education, it trains the mind. That's the most important thing out of anything that we do. And it allows us, particularly in your kind of teaching and the teaching that your audience does, if we're teaching for a growth mindset and we're teaching in a way that includes that allows them and encourages and rewards them for experimenting, then we're training them for future success, whether they never play a note on the piano again for the rest of their lives or wherever they choose to go. This training the mind is, I think that's really what value component of what we're doing is.
And I just want to go back to, well, we'll wrap it up in just a second, but you mentioned that some of the work you're doing is with professional musicians who are trying to exit the music industry. It's an interesting situation to be in, because obviously you're trying to help new graduates stay in the industry by looking at all the para musical roles they could have. Are you finding that there is more opportunity for people who are already in the industry to get some of these other jobs, and that you can encourage them to stay? Or are these people who are just, I'm done, I've got to do something different?
They're generally people choosing to transition. Okay. So rather than being broken either through like workplace injury or challenge is
Burnout or
psychological
whatever.
because burnout. Yeah, they're actually those saying, look, I'm pretty happy what I'm doing right now, but I see that in 12 months' time or 18 months' time or 6 months' time, I'm really looking for a new challenge because particularly a lot of the musicians I work with are full-time orchestral musicians, and there's not a lot of career development available when you've got the job as principal tuba. There's really, there's no CEO of tubas, or there's nowhere to go.
Poor tubas. Oh, look, we don't have anything against tubas. You have a son who plays tuba, so just want to mention that.
But there's little opportunity for them to be challenged in many of the ways that we love to be challenged as high functioning creative individuals. So a lot of them are saying, look, I'm really happy now, but I'm looking for what else I could do.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So and also I think just for them to talk to someone who has been a musician and hasn't been a musician and has been a musician again, and who I celebrate the fact that my music training didn't work out and that I chose to do something else and came back. But there's few people saying it's okay to not be a musician. It's okay to have a music education and to choose to do something else. And here's a whole range of ways that can happen for you. And here's how your skills are valuable.
Oh, brilliant. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your pearls of wisdom. It's been great.
Thank you, Tim.
A number of you listeners will hear your voice and go, oh, she sounds like that's a beautiful voice for radio. And you actually have a podcast, right?
I do have a podcast.
You better tell us quickly about your podcast.
Okay, my podcast, it's called Beyond the Stage, which shouldn't come as a surprise given what we've been talking about. And I talk to professionally trained musicians who have pursued careers in law or medicine or business or as entrepreneurs, exactly about how their skills have mapped from one thing to another. Some of them are former professional performers, like in orchestras, and some are who trained at a tertiary level as well as doing their training in law and medicine. So we talk about how to live a musical life when performance may not be part of your life. We talk about how the skills are really valuable between the two things. And the last episode, we're on a little hiatus from the podcast at the moment, but the last episode was actually a flip where I talked to a music educator who trained as an emergency physician and worked as a doctor in the emergency department of the hospitals for a couple of years, and then couldn't ignore the call to live a creative life and went and did a master's of conducting in the States, and then came back and is now one of the most entrepreneurial and most incredible music educators and conductors in this country. So we talk about the value. We talk about the value of following your passion and how you will find a way. If it's what you've got to do, you'll find a way to make it happen.
That sounds like a fascinating story. Where do we go to find and have a listen to that?
So it's all available through my website, which is notablevalues.com.
Fantastic. And you can find out more about Susan on her website. And if you're in Australia, and I imagine you probably travel too, if you'd like Susan to speak, she is a very well-renowned speaker on a whole number of topics related to what we've been talking about today. So if you'd like to invite her to speak to your studio or school or anything like that at all, her website again, notablevalues.com.
And I'll bring the tuba and bassoon for only a little added extra cost.
Bum, 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 bum. Those poor tuba players, they must get so sick of tonic and dominance in pieces of music. That's for sure.
No, we own, I can tell you now, so talking about creative teaching, that my kids play a lot of jazz and funk stuff. So we don't do traditional orchestral repertoire for bassoon.
Oh, that's not right. No, that's not right at all.
And Tim, my 11-year-old, he has an amplified tuba mouthpiece.
What? I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, so he plays a bit of Uptown Funk bass line by Mark Ronson, plugged into the amplifier, cranked up to 11.
Just in case the tuba wasn't loud enough.
Yeah, well, it's changed from tonic dominant,
Classic. Oh, dear. Well, look forward to seeing your sons on stage at some stage. Thank you again so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the audience for listening today.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for listening to the Creative Piano Teaching Podcast. We'd love to help take your teaching to the next level as a member of our supportive community. Use the coupon Piano Podcast for $100 off an annual membership of Tim's Inner Circle today. To find out more, head to timtopham.com/community.